Let's bring in our political editor, Andrew Clennell. And Andrew, the Federal Minister David Littleproud this morning was talking about uppercuts, and there was a war of words with the state and the federal government. Greg Hunt came out and, well, it looked like the UN Secretary-General with his diplomatic speak.
Well, he was saying how great the states were, wasn't he? What about this news this hour, Kieran, about the Blues Fest in Byron? 3 cases in a party house. No evidence of exposure elsewhere, and the New South Wales Health has just cancelled the Blues Fest. Interesting decision when you compare it to, say, in Sydney, if there's 3 cases or 20 cases, they don't cancel the footy. But anyway, Greg Hunt, well, I mean, he's largely suspected of giving the Telegraph the table today, which showed the states were underperforming in terms of giving out their doses. He was clearly the subject of attack of Brad Hazzard, and I'd say the Queensland authorities as well. So we know the federal government was, but he said the states are doing fine. Tripped up a bit when asked if he was still committing to 6 million vaccines being out there by May 10.
Absolute best, and they're doing an excellent job. And I was asked on Monday about Queensland Health at a time when there was some debate and some dispute, and emphasised my full support for their work, and I'll re-emphasise that again today. With great respect on that, there are 2 different issues. One is the doses in, the other one is the doses out. As has been discussed earlier, we of course keep the contingency for the second dose, and for some weeks now I've been talking about the fact that at this phase we'll be making sure that there are the first doses with second dose contingencies, and CSL is producing large volumes, and those amounts are being delivered. I think I gave a figure recently on what we were expecting over a 3.5-week period, and there's no change in that. Then in terms of the rollout, we're continuing to expand. I'm not aware of that particular figure that you had mentioned, but I'll go back and check the record on that. But our goal is to make sure that we're in a position where phase 2A begins in the middle of the year. That remains on track, that all doses are done for everybody who seeks it.
I reckon they're about $3.80 to make the October deadline. Anyway, we'll see. Excuse my scepticism. I didn't think there'd be a vaccine either, Kieran. So, oh, by the way, when Greg Hunt says with great respect, you know he's annoyed at the question. It's like that yes minister term, with respect means without respect. Anyway, not much respect shown towards him today from Anastasia Palaszczuk, her deputy Stephen Miles, or Gladys Berejiklian, and annoyed at this suggestion the states weren't doing their jobs.
What we needed to do is to make sure we had enough for that second vaccine. If the Commonwealth can tell us what their supply is, we are more than happy to roll out the rest of that as quickly as possible.
We have not had certainty of supply to our hospitals through the vaccine rollout so far. That has required the holding back of enough doses to ensure that we can administer the second dose.
And Gladys Berejiklian as well wasn't too happy. Let's listen to her, and let's also listen to Brad Hazzard asking for an apology, which obviously didn't come from the Federal Health Minister.
The only way we'll have a chance of meeting those deadlines is if the Commonwealth and the state government work cooperatively. But what is also extremely unfair is that when we are given 24 or 48 hours notice about how many new doses we're getting, and as you can appreciate, disseminating that within 24 hours or 48 hours is a difficult task. And so I just want to put the facts on the table.
To then go dumping figures into the media, which actually are quite misleading, is wholly inappropriate, very, very disappointing, and I think is not really helpful in ensuring community confidence. So let me make it very clear. I'm as angry as I have ever been in this 15 months of war against this virus. And I think that the federal government should be proffering some apologies to not only our government but other governments around the country.
So let's look at the order of the day. Anastasia Palaszczuk, Stephen Miles were first. Well, actually, David Littleproud was first out of the blocks having a go at the states, as was that Daily Telegraph story that came from the federal government saying only about half the doses have been administered by the states. Queensland admitting that they were keeping the rest because they didn't trust the feds to get them a second dose. Then came Anastasia Palaszczuk and Stephen Miles bashing up the feds. Then came Scott Morrison saying, nothing to see here, everything's fine. Then came Gladys Berejiklian and Brad Hazzard bashing up the feds. Then came Greg Hunt saying, absolutely everything's fine. I don't know what all the fuss is. Anyway, here was Scott Morrison saying he didn't want to get in a tit for tat. I'll bet he doesn't.
Future of Canberra of a lack of transparency because of a supply issue.
Well, I don't agree with that. They have a 12-week forward projection of dose distribution to all states and territories. The Premier has his. All the other states have theirs. But again, I have no interest in getting involved in the tit for tat on vaccine.
Might be a bit late for that. At least Stephen Marshall in South Australia was nodding at that announcement of the missile industry manufacturing announcement from Scott Morrison. So anyway, Scott Morrison originally told us that we were going to be faster than anyone in terms of the vaccine. I think most Australians were relaxed because they didn't mind seeing the rest of the world try it out first, if you like. But when this Brisbane lockdown happens, it changes the dynamic. When the Blues Fest gets cancelled, it changes the dynamic. When Easter gets cancelled for a lot of people because they didn't know whether the lockdown was going to persist or not, it changes the dynamic. Now a lot of focus is going to come on this vaccine, and yet Scott Morrison's telling us what Brendan Murphy, the Health Department Secretary, said to us a month ago, this rhetoric changing to it's not a race.
I certainly am not making any criticism of that. It's a big job. We're all doing it. It's not a race. It's not a competition.
So they were supposed to have 4 million vaccines out by now. Scott Morrison saying, well, the EU held 3 million back. With domestic production, things will pick up.
Well, that target was explained months ago, that was dispensed with because of the problems we had with vaccines not coming from overseas. So that was dealt with months ago. So that being put up as some constant target is just politics.
So Gladys Berejiklian says we're supposed to do healthcare workers and our frontline workers. We're supposed to administer 300,000 doses in New South Wales, of which we've administered 100,000, and we've offered to help the feds more. She then says in the next breath, the feds are supposed to do 3 million here and they've done 50,000. And she says the argument they haven't administered all their doses is wrong.
We appreciate that they can't tell us all the time what we're getting because of the issues that are before them. They therefore need to offer us the same opportunity to respond to untrue statements about New South Wales lagging in relation to this.
Well, I guess just the normal rule of thumb is in politics, like in anything, if people are, pointing the finger and there's blame being thrown around, it's normally a pretty good assumption that things aren't going great. I think that's a fair assumption. Yet the Health Minister gets up and says it's extraordinary, the improvement.
Yeah, Greg Hunt...
He's talking it up.
Greg Hunt is prone to talking it up, isn't he? I mean, he basically said the National Cabinet was the greatest thing that had happened since the Second World War or something. I think we've established that's not the case. He's not shy of a superlative, Greg Hunt. But there'll be some superlatives in the other direction if the federal government and the state governments don't get their act together on this. Look, you can't give the state governments a total pass mark on this, no way. Queensland had an unvaccinated doctor and an unvaccinated nurse who started this thing. They've had to go into lockdown because their contact tracing is obviously not at the New South Wales standard. But at the same time, the federal government cannot keep getting up saying they are on target here. They have to admit that they're behind. They can't treat us like fools and say that black equals white like Greg Hunt just did and Scott Morrison to some extent did. And the test for them is over the next 4 or 5 weeks. And I think they'll be marked very harshly by the Australian public if they, A, don't get their act together and B, don't be honest about where we are. There's nothing wrong with saying, Kieran, that because of the EU and these other factors, we're behind where we said we would be. The Australian people would prefer honesty on this front, I'd suggest.
Yeah, well said. I think they would, and also prefer honesty, and also that everyone gets their act together and that we do start to see it speed up. Thank you so much. As always, talk to you soon, Andrew.